This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Communities of Neimar, Galicia, and heading a great yeshiva of hundreds of Talmidim, Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels became the chief rabbi of Weizen in 1930. 14 years later, 1944, the Rav, along with his entire community, was deported to Auschwitz. In the introduction to Rav Meisel's Sefer, Shalos Teshuvas Mekadshei Hashem, he records with great emotion how miraculously he was successful in smuggling a shofar into Auschwitz on that fateful Rosh Hashanah in 1944. He writes, "The recollection of that fateful Rosh Hashanah shall forever be implanted in my memory. Against all odds, I was able to bring a shofar into the camp. On the first day of Rosh Hashanah, I went from block to block, shofar in hand, to blow the tkiyos. My life was in danger the entire time, but thanks to Hashem's kindness, I was able to avoid both the Nazis and the Kapos. I had the privilege to sound the shofar on that Rosh Hashanah 20 different times. This literally revived the spirits of my emaciated brothers and sisters, blowing new life into their souls. I then blew the shofar for a group of about 1,000, a group who were about to be herded onto trains for transport. I can still hear the sobs that burst forth from these men and boys as I blew the tkiyos. At that moment, I recalled the explanation written by the Shlach HaKadosh about the mystical meaning of the tkiyos. Says the Shlach HaKadosh, the sound of the shofar begins with a tkiyah, a long straight blast, and then it breaks down into shvarim trua. This is compared to the state of the Jewish people, who at one time were strong, who were upright. In the times that we had a Beis Hamikdash, and we were in Eretz Yisrael, and we had great Nevi'im and great sages. But now we are broken and bent in our long and bitter galus. Yet despite our suffering, there is a great ray of hope. Just as the tkiyos end with the tkiyah gedolah, so too we have a long, majestic, and glorious future to look forward to that will endure and last until the end of time. After I finished blowing the tkiyos, in many, many blocks, there was a group of 1,400 boys who were locked in a separate block to be sent to the crematoria. When they discovered that I had a shofar, they shouted, they pleaded, they cried, they begged that I should come blow shofar to them on their final night here on planet Earth, Ba'olam Hazeh. They so wanted to fulfill this precious mitzvah on Rosh Hashanah before they would give up their lives al Kiddush Hashem. When I heard their request, I was pained and terribly confused. There was really nothing that I would have wanted more than to blow shofar for them. But on the other hand, it was a terrible risk, because it was nearly dusk, and a very, very dangerous time. Very soon the Nazis would be coming back to try to carry out their diabolical plan. If the Nazis would have shown up when I was there blowing the shofar, I would have been taken to the crematoria as well. The ruthless kapos would never have allowed me to escape. I stood there by the entrance, besieged by great doubt. The decision was excruciating. I was really not sure that taking the risk and entering the block was justified. But the children did not let up. They cried, they pled, Rabbi, Rabbi, please have mercy on our souls. We beg you, please allow us to fulfill this last mitzvah in our last moments here on life. Writes Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, I stood there, frozen in indecision. To go, should I not go? Suddenly, my dear son, Zalman Leib, he comes over to me. He cries, he begs. He says, Tata, Tata, don't go. Don't put yourself in danger. You're going to turn me into an orphan. There won't be anyone to care for me. Please don't enter the block. You already blew shofar so many times today. You already risked your life again and again. You've done more than your share. Says Rabbi Hirsch Meisels, when I gazed at my son, who I love so much, I was overcome with emotion, with compassion, and I decided to accede to his request. But the boys in the condemned block continued to cry, continued to wail. Their pleas reached the very heavens. Meanwhile, some of the Hasidim in my block joined the pleas of these boys, urging me to hurry, saying there was still time. Go, Rebbe, blow shofar for them. So I said to myself, perhaps I should risk my life and give these boys one final zechus before their lives would be snuffed out. My decision was made. Come what may, I would enter the block and blow the shofar for the desperate boys, ignoring the cries of my very own son. I started to negotiate with the capos, begging them to allow me to enter. Eventually, some of the inmates bribed the capos to let me in. The money-hungry capos warned me that I was risking my life. If the bell at the gate sounded, signaling that the Nazis were coming, then my fate would be sealed together with the boys, and I would be sent to the gas chambers together with them. I agreed. I asked my son to serve as the lookout. I told him, if the SS are coming, cry out, and I will stop even if I'm in the middle of the tkiyos. Writes Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, the truth is my decision was not in accordance with halacha that forbids a Jew to endanger their life for the mitzvah of tkiyas shofar. But my reasoning was as follows. Either way, I didn't have much of a chance of survival. Either way, our life in the camps was not a life. Day after day, we saw our fellow inmates shot, gassed, burnt, collapsing in the field in sheer exhaustion of malnutrition. At least, I said to myself, let me help these boys fulfill one last mitzvah. This was my justification. There is no writer gifted enough. There is no pen whose ink can possibly do justice to my emotions as I entered the block where the boys were herded together awaiting their fate. It is a miracle that my heart was not rent asunder when I saw these precious boys and heard their bitter sobbing. They pushed toward me, to reach me, to kiss my hands, to touch my clothing. Rebbe, Rebbe, have mercy on us. Their wails reached the Shamayim. When I started to prepare myself for the tkiyos, and I cried out, Min ha-meitzar. From the depths I call out to you, the Ribbon Shalom. The children exploded into a fresh sobbing, demanding that not only I blow shofar for them, but they said, Rebbe, Rebbe, give us one last drasha. They crowded around me. They didn't let me continue. What could I say? I was afraid that giving a drasha would delay and put my life in even greater peril than it was. But I could not ignore their pleas, and I tried to speak to them words of hope. After I blew the tkiyos, I tried to hurry out of the block before the doors would be locked. A few boys followed me. They said, Rebbe, do you have maybe a kazayas of bread in your pocket so that we could fulfill the mitzvah of eating on Rosh Hashanah? The halacha does not allow a person to fast on this holy day. And I was bitterly disappointed that I had nothing to give them. And I would have to return to my block, never to return again. What a heart-rending fate, I said to myself. And adding to their sorrow, they would have to fast on Rosh Hashanah. I escaped the block in the nick of time. That night, the boys were taken to the gas chamber. Hashem Yimkoim Damam. The memory of these precious boys will remain forever etched in my mind. Writes Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels. And then he reveals to us a very insightful comment. Writes Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels. Now I understood for the first time why on Rosh Hashanah we read the Maisa of Akedas Yitzchak. Says Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, because generation after generation, the day of Rosh Hashanah had been dedicated for Klal Yisrael to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim in public, just as these boys had done. Throughout our history, the actual Akedas Yitzchak was not the only act of sacrifice that Klal Yisrael endured. Many a Rosh Hashanah have we sanctified and sacrificed our lives for the performance of mitzvahs on the highest level. When our holy ancestors took out the Sefer Torah on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and they read about the Akeida, this was an act that they had a lot of connection to. Many times did they face challenges of sacrifice in earlier generations. For them, every day, every Rosh Hashanah was a reenactment of Akedas Yitzchak. But how do we relate to Akedas Yitzchak? What connection do we have with the Akeida? And it's quite a frightening thing the Shlach HaKadosh tells us at the end of Parshas B'chukoisai, that we always like to invoke Zechus Avos. We always like to invoke Akedas Yitzchak. But says the Shlach, Zechus Avos is not always to our advantage. Says the Shlach, if we don't live up to these types of actions, if we're so far removed from their level of greatness, if we have no connection at all to this type of behavior, then not only do the actions of our forefathers not bring us merit, but they actually serve as a kitrug, an accusation, that why are we not living up to the example of our avos? So why do we even bring it up? Of what merit is the Akedas Yitzchak to us in the year 2015 in Tafshin Ayin Vav? But says the Shlach HaKadosh, every generation has their own challenges. Every generation has their own nisyonos. We today are faced with a very different type of nisayon. The challenge of freedom, the challenge of liberty, the challenge of success, the challenge to pursue the American dream, the challenge that makes us forget what life is all about, what our purpose is. And slowly, slowly, it starts to dull our drive to be punctilious, to be careful in matters of halacha, maybe to be careful to daven with a minyan, to be careful to learn every day, to be careful with our eyes, what we look at. For women, the opportunities of America, the opportunities to be part of the workplace, create pressures to dress in a certain way, a way that may not be in sync with tznius. Everybody knows that when it comes to tznius, there are certain exacting halachos, what has to be sanua, what has to be covered. But then there's an entirely different aspect of the spirit of the law. And that is an area of tznius that we're bombarded with. The currents, the undercurrents of the society we live in counteract the entire concept. Comes the Shlach HaKadosh. Writes the Shlach HaKadosh, you know what our Akeida is? You know what our sacrifice is? The Shlach says, Lamoid behashkama l'Torah u'letfila. Our Akeida is to get up early in the morning, to fight our laziness, to fight our inertia, to come to a minyan, to come to davening, to come to learn, to come to a shiur. When a woman says she's going to fight the trends and fight the tide and swim upstream and follow the spirit of tznius and not the spirit of what we see on the streets, that is her Akeida. These challenges, says the Shla HaKadosh, whatever challenge a person is faced with in life, one should think that the Ribbon Shalom has designated this challenge to them. This is their Akeida. Says the Shla, a person should say that the Ribbon Shalom has prepared this challenge for them, so that just like when Avram Avinu passed with flying colors the challenge of the Akeida, every individual has their own Akeida, so that our children and our grandchildren can reap the benefit of that mitzvah until the end of time. And at the time of the mitzvah of Tkei HaShofar, which the Gemara says in the Masechta Rosh Hashanah Daf Tezayin, that the horn of the ayil, the ram's horn, reminds the Ribbon Shalom of the Akedas Yitzchak. Everybody should think into their own lives, where there may be an area that is challenging to them, that is difficult for them in terms of observance, and then identify it and say, this year, this is my Akeida. This year, this is my challenge. This year, this is where I will sacrifice for Hashem. And this way we will be able to tap into the most powerful zechus that we have, the zechus of Akedas Yitzchak. And we'll all be zoicha to a year of chayim, good health, parnasa berevach, nachas from our children, v'malei Hashem kol mishaleseinu letoiva, aksiva chsima toiva, agaben shtiyar.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.